So to kick things off, Dana, do you mind starting with just telling us a little bit about yourself?
I'm really nervous. Just gonna put that out there. I am really nervous. I'm also really excited being here. I'm looking out at a room of people and just going, wow, I wish that I was in this space when I was, your age and I had the opportunity like this. My story really starts, I live in New York. I started out as a fashion blogger. And I was putting out these, gorgeous photoshopped images of myself, but also I was struggling with an eating disorder. I had bulimia and binge eating disorder. I was also dealing with drug addiction and just extremely low. I was a very insecure person. And as I was going to therapy for my eating disorder and all of my other mental health issues that I was dealing with, I started realizing that fashion was fueling my unattainable beauty standard and the unattainable body image that I was trying to go for. I was having people comment on my photos saying, oh my God, you're so beautiful, ideal body, oh, I wish I was you. And I was like, God, if they knew how much I was struggling inside, they wouldn't want to be me. So during my self-care, my mental health care, I started releasing my photoshopped images. I started putting my real self out there. And since then, Do the Hot Pants has gone from a fashion blog to a platform where I share stories of other people. I use my privilege to uplift voices who might not be heard. And I also co-founded something called The Ripple, which is a nonprofit women's collective, and we have members in New York, LA, and Washington, DC, and we host allyship events and panels in New York. Thank you.
Jermal, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Jermal, and I am excited, and I'm honored, and just very stoked to be here. So before I'll share a little bit about my story and how I got to be where I am today. So I think in life sometimes it takes an unfortunate situation or an event to kind of realize your passion, and that's no different for me. So in 2007, I lost my 13-year-old brother to suicide, and that was my first kind of awakening into mental health and the stigma around it. That loss was tragic for our family, and one of my goals is that no other family has to experience that, and we work towards that, and hopefully working towards within our communities, we never let that happen again. One of my favorite quotes is by Frederick Douglass, and it reads, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And that is why I'm an advocate, especially in the space around mental health, specifically for men, but also in terms of promoting healthy masculinity and ending gender-based violence. At Next Gen Men, we aim to create spaces for men where they can ask these questions, where we can challenge their belief systems and attitudes around what it means to be a man, and in a very healthy way. And by engaging, empowering, and empowering, and educating young men, we hope that the future, we don't have to stigmatize mental health any further, that when men need help, they're not afraid to ask for it and they go seek it, and that violence is no longer the solution.
Talitha?
Bonjour, Ani, Talitha Tolles, Brampton and Junjba. Hello. I'm so excited to be here with each and every one of you. So my name is Talitha, and my journey really began when I was a lot younger. I actually had no idea that my family was Indigenous because we refused to speak in our family about residential school system and how that impacted my family. And so I didn't actually know where my heritage was. I had no idea where my family was from. And one of the biggest things in our family is not to lie. And when I was in grade 4, I was lying about what my background was. I was Portuguese or Italian. And my grandma found out about this and was extremely unimpressed with me that I'd been lying. And we ended up sitting down and having a conversation when I was a little bit older. And it was here that she kind of broke down and started to tell me about what it was like for her growing up and the things that she had gone through as an Indigenous woman. And I didn't really know what to do with that. And so she kind of encouraged me to go on a journey to learn more about who I was and educate the rest of my family, and that's kind of exploded. And I ended up actually working for an organization that's incredible that some of you may know that's called We. And I was working alongside them in their Indigenous space, working with youth all across Canada, in every province and territory, working with Indigenous youth, but also non-Indigenous youth. And I ended up going on a speaking tour across Canada, talking about why it's so important for us to understand Canada's true history and the history of Indigenous peoples right here on this land.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So those are three really powerful stories. You each bring unique perspective to the table. For the first question, Jermal, I'm going to start with you. Do you mind explaining how you might start with an idea and take it to the next level? Like, what are the kind of things you might have to consider when starting a new initiative?
Yeah, so I think first for us, we started with the message from the Movember Foundation. So there was a grant opportunity, and the idea was to change the face of men's health. And my co-founder, Jake, and I, we had kind of conversation around how we wanted things to be for us when we were younger. That's one of my quotes on my laptop. It's always be who you needed to be when you're younger. And I think that became like one of the essential missions for what we're doing at Next Gen Men. So in that, we understood that our mission was never going to be perfect right away, that it was always going to be a working title, so to speak. But looking for those opportunities where you can cultivate that mission, gather a team, people who care about the same kind of messages you do, and then just put forth your best effort when you're submitting these ideas to people who are looking at them, like grantees or grantors, and just maybe other small pitch competitions. So I think that's kind of the best way you can start.
Thank you. And maybe if you're not starting from scratch, maybe you've already have something you're passionate about. It could be what you're studying. It could be what you're working with. I know, Dana, you were working with Do the Hot Pants as a fashion blog, and you kind of transitioned that from a fashion blog to more of a body positivity blog. So what did that transition look like for you?
Yeah, actually, I get asked this question. They're like, so what was the moment? And it wasn't a moment that I transitioned. It was years that I got to the place where I felt safe enough to share my story and to let people who were seeing me as this, fully, glossy, photoshopped image to be like, no, I'm so insecure about my acne. No, I have an eating disorder. No, I have all of this stuff inside of me that's not just good. It took a year for me to go from. So I have a story. So there was a transitioning point, and I ended up releasing Photoshop photos of myself that I was previously Photoshopping. And I did this, it was more of self-care. It was something I was doing with therapy, and I thought I need to expose who I really am. And that went completely viral. And it was at that point that I thought, okay, I can't go back. I can't go back to being the fashion blogger because the truth is out there. And so I just want to keep pushing myself to share my story and to not be afraid of what people are going to think. But it was a very slow process. And even the first event that I threw, a women's networking and empowerment event in New York, I had the idea for a year. I sat on the idea for a year because I was terrified no one was going to come. And if no one came, it was a reflection on how good I am, how cool I am, how worthy I am, how much I matter. And I just realized it's like, you just have to do it. So that, yeah, it was a very long transition.
So during that transition, I guess you may have appealed to a different audience. At first, it was more of that fashion blog. Were you worried that maybe you'd be losing a lot of your follower base? Was there anything you tried to use as a tool to maybe ensure that you would still have an audience that would want to listen to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I have people message me and they're like, I've been following you since you were a fashion blogger and it's amazing to see the transition. And I don't know if I was scared of losing followers. I was just scared that people were going to hate me because they saw that I was a flawed individual. I think sharing my story actually created human connection with people, and it actually grew. I think that's why it went viral. I think that's why I had people messaging me going, oh my God, I'm not alone. Oh my God, I don't like my body either. And oh my God, I have an eating disorder, or I'm afraid of my skin or being seen. And so that actually played a big part in the activism work I do now, which is storytelling and listening to other people, because through empathy and connection creates real humanity and friendship.
Awesome. And I guess moving on to Talitha, when you joined WE, how did you generate that kind of buy-in with the communities? Was there something you used that helped you engage the communities better?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is relationships go so far. Meeting people, having those friendships, creating those relationships is so important. Something that I learned when I first started working for the organization is social capital is the most incredible tool that you could ever have. This right now, what you're all doing, being here, networking, getting to know other folks, this is going to be so helpful to you. You never know when you may need a favor from someone, or you need that shoulder to cry on, or whatever it is. You have those people now that are here in this room with you. And that was probably the biggest lesson that I learned working for WE, because constantly I would be put in situations or put in different places where I was like, I've never done this before. This is so new for me. And I could pick up the phone and call someone and be like, hey, can I take you out for coffee? Can we chat about this situation, or walk me through how you would deal with this? And that was the biggest thing for me, was really about building relationships, building those friendships, and having long-lasting connections.
That's incredible advice. I think it's a lot of the things we're trying to promote here at the Jack Summit. We are trying to develop our message, make it as clear as possible. We want to be able to relate to other people, have our message understood. And obviously, we're here to network. We're here to meet each other, connect with each other, and share our experiences. So I think we are hopefully doing a good job at that. I guess another big question we might have as advocates is, if you don't necessarily identify with a specific group, but you want to advocate for them, their rights, how can you do that, and what role could I play in that, or how would I play that role? Talitha, could you speak to that?
Totally. So this is something that's been really interesting for me growing up, being unaware of my background and having visible white privilege, but coming from an oppressed community has left me in a state. Just trying to figure out where my place is and where I fit. And then having this whole other level of being an advocate and advocating on behalf of communities. And for me, the first thing that comes to mind is allyship. And how do you work as an ally? And the first piece that comes to mind is, when you are an ally, this is not necessarily a noun, it's a verb, meaning you need to be constantly actioning on this. You can't just stop. You need to continue pressing through even when it is hard. And this is a conversation Dana and I actually had a little bit earlier on, was just talking about what are these like privilege pit stops that we stop when we are privileged, and how do we take care of ourselves and our mental health when you're working on these issues that can sometimes be really tricky. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But for me, it's really about learning. It's about understanding the situation that you're going into, or the group of people that you're working with, educating yourselves. And that doesn't mean asking that one person that you know, hey, like, can you tell me everything about your culture? It's about you going and putting in that work, putting in the legwork, and really understanding what that community is about, or what those people are about. And then from then asking, how do you support from behind? How do you be that voice from behind? Not always being right up there and being the first voice heard. It's about leading from behind.
So that's incredible advice. That kind of leads me into my next question for Dana. I know you guys were talking about this a little while ago, but in terms of taking your ego out of the picture, how do you make your voice or your platform available to other people to elevate their voices?
Yeah, I mean, so, I'm up here talking about activism. I also have an extremely privileged body, thin, white, cis, able-bodied. I know I fit society's beauty standards. So how do I advocate for people who don't look like me, who have different backgrounds than me? And I do it, I know I keep talking about storytelling, but I can stand on a stage and I can talk about racism and transphobia and homophobia and all of these things. And that's fine and dandy, but the way that you are actually going to get empathy and put yourself in someone else's shoes is to hear from that person, is to hear from the person themselves going through it. And so I actually started a series called my Body Story series, and it's literally, if your body could tell a story, what story would that tell? And we all have unique stories. You have a different story from your sister, your parent, your neighbor, the person who raised you. And all of those stories are unique and special and important. But you should tell that story. And if the story isn't yours, you should hold the mic and you should provide the platform for someone else to tell their story. And I think that that's how we can be allies and use our privilege for good. I I'm privileged in that I have this big platform of Do the Hot Pants that I started as the fashion blog. And I'm able now to say, okay, I've created this space. How can I share it? And I can share it through other people sharing their stories and having an audience to speak to that may not have heard this story otherwise.
Thank you. I just want to remind all of you, if you do have any questions, submit them to polyev.com/Jack.Summit. We will be getting towards those questions at the end of this panel discussion, and they will appear here. So the questions will appear in order of most upvoted. If you see something like vote for it, and I will ask it, remember to start that question off with either a D colon, J colon, or T colon, depending on who you want to ask that question to. So Jermal, we talk a lot about different contexts and how that might influence our advocacy work, or how it might not influence our advocacy work. How does that apply to next-gen men?
Yeah, I think in terms of like when we go into our schools and our communities that we're at, our message overall is the same. It's about breaking down those barriers for young men where they feel that they can't speak out. It's something that they've been taught. They've been role modeled that they're not allowed to share how they're truly feeling. So our message is pretty much the same when we're in there, but across when we're actually inside this space, that's where it becomes a little bit more. We have to navigate some more, and we have to learn how to be authentic in what we're doing. When we're authentic, we allow the participants to feel safe, feel like they're cared for, and that's when we start to see the actual like beauty in the work happen. And they feel safe enough to actually share their story, share what's been going on. One of the stories that actually comes to mind for me is a young gentleman. I think we had been in about week 8 of our program, of a 10-week program, and he hadn't really shared much up to this point. And we had gone through our mental health session and all of that. But it was after another young boy said, like, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling sad because this happened, that he came out and started to share his story. And I think that's just the beauty of it, is like our message is the same for any platform that we go in, because we understand that this is a struggle that for young men that they're still facing. And I think that's the best way to answer that.
Thank you. How about you, Talitha? So does context play a similar role where your messaging is typically consistent from community to community, or does it change depending on the audience?
Yeah, it definitely changes. Every audience, you have to be able to cater to their needs. You have to be able to meet them where they're at. And it's so interesting meeting different people, meeting different communities, and saying, okay, we have one way of doing this where I can present you with a program or a solution to whatever issue it is, and we run with it, or we can sit down and we can do it in partnership. And we can say, okay, if I'm building out a youth leadership program, I can sit down with the community members that are experiencing the issues that are happening within the community and say, okay, how do we start to take action on these? What do your youth need in order to take action in a positive way? What type of activities do we want to run? And that's going to look different for everyone across the board, wherever that is. And I think that's the beauty of human connection, is being able to sit down and have those relationships to really cater to everyone and what they need in that moment.
I think we can definitely relate to that with Jack.org. It's one of the reasons we bring everyone from every corner of the country together, so we can talk about the differences in the mental health landscape of our own communities and what the priorities might be and how they would differ from community to community. So obviously sometimes context might not play as large of a role, sometimes it does, and I think that's something we really need to consider whenever we are using our roles as advocates to speak to the communities we're working with. But when it comes to talking about calling people in versus calling people out, how does that distinction affect your advocacy work? Is it something you have to consider when you're working with the people that you do work with? Dana, do you mind speaking a little bit towards that?
Yeah. So I used to be the first person to post somebody's profile photo and say, this person was terrible and problematic and we should publicly shame them and call them out, until it happened to me. And once something happens to you and you experience just how painful and traumatic it is, you kind of reframe if you're going to do it to other people. And you know, I love that you said something earlier. It was like your mission statement keeps changing, and you don't set it in stone, because we will never be woke enough. You will never know everything. And I think that we need to be facilitating learning and not demonizing. You know, I've stopped saying men are trash. I've stopped saying, you know, this person is done, this person is canceled. And sure, I know that there's situations that it works and the person really is terrible, but as a general rule, like, I've stopped doing it because I know what it felt like to be called trash and canceled, and it didn't feel good. In fact, it put me in a defensive mode. When public shaming, what it does is it puts you into this situation where you just want to self-preserve yourself. You will do anything in your power to not look foolish, to not look silly, to not look bad. And so that's what you do. You know, you go, I'm not that person, and you're in hyper defensive mode instead of being able to sit and say, okay, there's some things that are right about this, and there was some problems, and you know, maybe I could have learned more. But having literally who you are called trash and challenged, you just want to preserve. And so my activism has completely done a 180, and I have been practicing a lot more calling in. Granted, that comes with privilege. That comes with me being able to go in spaces that are safe for me and not for other people. You know, I wanted to just touch on something. I threw an event called How to Be an Ally to Muslim Women about a year ago, and one of the panelists said one of the most important things to me I've ever heard, and she said, you want to know how to be an ally? Don't delete your racist uncle off Facebook, because you need to be able to have the conversations that are unsafe for me to have. So if I'm here calling out my racist uncle, I have shut him off from learning and from wanting to have a conversation with me. Granted, that's not the job of someone else to do. That is my job, and with privilege comes responsibility. But I'm not telling you that there's never a time for call out, because there are times for calling out. But I think when we target individuals, just know that if you do it, you're going to put them into self-preservation, fight, flight, freeze mode. And I know it because I've been there, and that's it.
Yeah, I love that. I completely agree with it. I think it's definitely...
Thank you. Also, I just want to add, it's actually scary to tell people I've been called out. I was talking with my friend backstage, and I said, I'm going to say I've been called out, and everyone's going to think that they're going to go, well, what did she do wrong, and what was this, and what was the problematic things she was doing? And I think we need to get rid of that shame and actually have discussions about calling out, calling in, about doing problematic behavior, about finding old tweets, about all of this stuff. We need to have conversations because we need to make learning safer and not put racists and homophobes and everybody underground because they're so terrified of being the next poster child of call out.
So yeah, there definitely are times where you can or cannot call things out or in. I know when it comes out to maybe problematic behaviors in our society, different attitudes, maybe calling out those behaviors and those attitudes are what we can do. But when it comes to talking to individuals, that might not help so much. It might discourage them from wanting to learn more. Maybe trying to call them in, educate them. Maybe that's what we need to do. That kind of leads us into some questions we've got coming up. But I think I'm going to pause and take a look at some of the questions we've got from the audience. Sorry. So one really popular question we've been getting is, our chapter is all female. This is for Jermal. How can we appropriately approach the topic of male mental health?
How can you do that? Okay.
Call next gen.
Yeah, I think what's important to kind of distinguish or maybe start with is the socialization pattern for both. I'm going to say all genders, but when we're talking about female and male specifically, that there's two different socialization patterns. And for men, they have a script that's pre-laid out for them, and they need to conform to this. And that for girls and women, that they have a script that's out there for them, and they need to conform to this as well. And that these things come with a set of ideas, beliefs, and attached to it. So I think once you start with that approach, you can say, oh, I understand why this may happen, and in terms of calling in, you would be more empathetic to these things, not excusing the things that are happening and that they're right, but you may be more empathetic to say, I understand that you may be feeling trapped, or I understand that you may be feeling pressured to live up to this thing or this ideal that you might not want to live up to, do you feel trapped? And maybe just having that conversation, asking that question, and I think that's what I can start with that. Yeah.
I agree. I think definitely empathizing is a big step you need to take. And I think also we touched upon allyship too. Maybe you don't identify with a certain community, so try to learn what the issues might be, try to educate yourself and reach out and see how you might be able to help advocate. So great question. I'm gonna get back to, I guess this is a similar kind of question, but are certain audiences sometimes more important to target than others? If so, how do you identify that target audience? And does your messaging change depending on who you're talking to? So Jermal, I know you mentioned that the messaging doesn't always change, but what about the people you reach out to? Do you directly target the people you are trying to provide the messaging to?
Yeah, so I think for our messaging, it's mostly for teachers, parents, principals, those in the school community that understand the impact or the issues we're trying to change. The message for the participants, the young boys that sign up for our program is very different. They understand that it's going to be an after-school program. They understand that it's going to be 10 weeks. They understand that there's going to be snacks. They understand they're going to talk about issues about like, oh, I don't get to talk about these things about being a boy. I might feel comfortable doing it here. So that's how we start, and that's the message for them, where teachers come to us with issues like, I'm having boys touch girls inappropriately at school. I'm having this kid that's getting kicked out of class frequently. So our message for the teachers is very different than what it would be like for our participants. So just understanding that if something you've learned in university or college, that logic model definitely helps in that piece of understanding who your key targets are and how you're going to reach out to them. So for us and our parents and teachers, it's through our newsletters. It's going to the schools, and we're being actively on the foot in that scenario. And for the young gentlemen, the language is the same or a little bit different. The message is the same, but the language is a little bit different.
So kind of a similar question for you, Talitha, about different audiences and who you should be targeting with your messaging. Can you target anyone and everyone, or are there certain types of groups? We talked about this a little bit earlier. There are 3 different categories you kind of provided. I think that would be really helpful to discuss.
Yeah, totally. The way that I kind of look at this is like a spectrum. There are so many spectrums in life, and this one is kind of for your target audience. You have people who are willing to change, willing to listen to what you have to say, are so ready, and they're ready to join your team. You have people in the middle that are kind of wavering, and they could be convinced to join your cause, but they're really tricky to kind of get to your side. And then you have people who, no matter what, they're never gonna change. They have the same opinion, they have taken what they've learned, and they're holding on to it with all their might. And so in this spectrum, where I like to focus is those people right in the middle and those people on the end that are totally gonna join your team and are gonna be there rallying with you. It is so hard to sit there and go into these battles emotionally with people that you know you're never gonna be able to change their opinion or what they believe in. And you can spend so much time doing that. And I think probably all 3 of us have done that in the past, is sitting there and having conversations and talking to people and calling people in, calling people out, all of the above. But where we need to focus our time and our energy and our power is those people in the middle who are really willing to change, and those people on the end that are also there, that are gonna help support you and help you thrive in whatever cause it is that you're fighting for.
I like that too. I think it also kind of depends maybe on who the messaging is coming from. I know with us, the messaging is coming from youth. And a lot of the time, if it comes from an older person, an adult, I know when we give our talks at high schools, for example, I think they're a lot more effective because they come from youth. If they were to come from a 65-year-old psychiatrist, maybe we wouldn't consider their advice to be as valuable. They can't relate to us. So I definitely think it's not just who you're targeting, but who is doing the messaging. So obviously, passing the microphone off to someone else might be more effective, and maybe those kind of people would then be able to reach those people who are less willing to listen. So I guess moving on again, you've all been pretty successful in your own field of advocacy. So once you get established in your field, what are the challenges that you continue to face? And I guess this question is for all of you. We'll start with you, Jermal.
Biggest issue we face is sustainability. I think oftentimes there's like the issue at hand, and it's very important, and there's uproar in the media about it, and people are willing to throw money at it, and it's for a specific project and a certain timeline, and then it's done. But once you go in there and you see the good work and there's actual change being made, the narrative is already changed to something else. So for us, we still see that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. So not necessarily always relying on those big corporations, grantors to give you money, but becoming innovative in the way that you think about how you can get more funding coming in. So if that's throwing a fundraiser, being a bit more street level, and something we've done is instead of just having our youth program, we've opened up a chapter for just the general public to come by and have these conversations as well. And that money that they pay for cover goes back towards our youth program. So we found a way to keep our program sustainable through the community work that we're doing. So just that's a good way, is always being innovative. We've actually been in this room, I think it was a year and a half ago, giving a pitch competition around our project, Next Gen Men, and we lost. And that sucks. We've lost, I think, 75% of the pitches that we've actually given. But that's what you have to do. You have to keep going up there, saying your message, believing in it, because it does matter. You know that when you go back into your schools and the teachers are saying, I saw this kid, he's got an A now, and he's coming to class regularly. You know, those are the things that make you understand that what you're doing matters.
I completely agree that in that aspect of innovation, I think we often think innovation applies to business, always trying to develop new things, but when it comes to the work we're doing as advocates, we also need to be innovative, and we see that a lot with Jack.org. We don't do the same thing year after year after year. We're constantly adapting, developing new programs, and it's what keeps us moving forward. Just a little plug for something we're working on right now. It's the Be There platform, for example. And it's things like that. We're constantly trying to develop new things, new tools that the people can use that keep us moving forward. So Dana, how about you? What are the challenges that you, I guess, continue to face as an advocate?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges I face is changing people's minds. So I talk a lot about diet culture, fat phobia, sexism issues, especially the way society treats little girls and how they're literally viewed as bodies and not as whole, complete beings. It's really hard to tell someone about diet culture and talk about eating disorders and other mental health issues that are surrounding especially women's bodies when this is the world this is the society that's raised us. You know, you go outside and, you know, I don't shave my legs. I have yet to see representation of any hairy legs or hairy bodies on women in media. And we are so affected by media and the way media treats women and girls that for me to tell someone, be like, well, there's diet culture and fat phobia and all of this, when they have spent thousands of dollars to be thin, they have spent thousands of dollars on diet stuff, they have spent thousands of dollars on plastic surgery and all of these other things, it's really hard to like lift the veil to someone and say, no, you look at it, like look at society, look outside. It's, you know, it's like the mate with the red pill or the blue pill in the Matrix, you know, like sometimes I wish I could put my head back in the sand because it's really painful out there. Another thing that is really hard for me also is practicing what I preach. You know, I preach about all this stuff, but I still have bad body image days. I still have days I go, I want to shave my legs because I don't feel sexy and attractive and no guy's going to want to date me. And it's living the truth that I'm putting out there that I expect other people to live. And I have to remember that at the end of the day, we walk out those double doors and we walk back into a racist, sexist, homophobic, fat-shaming society. And I can only expect people to do their best and be open and listening, but it is a challenge to wake people up. And then I have to remember that it took a long time for me to wake up. And I'm still waking up. And I have to give that empathy and kindness to other people who are so trapped in the toxicity of the world around us.
Yeah, so obviously advocacy work can be really challenging, really slow, and sometimes even the small victories highlight the magnitude of the larger issues, and it can be really draining, it causes a lot of fatigue. Things might seem like they're moving too slow, so staying motivated can definitely be difficult, and keeping up the work can definitely be difficult. So we haven't really talked about this yet, but what about self-care? How does that play a role in your ability, I guess, to function as an advocate? Talitha, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think
We're all laughing.
we're all laughing for a reason, and that's because this is a massive challenge, and I think probably all three of us have gone through that. The work that we do is so intensive and takes so much of us, but I can only speak for myself in this. I have not been practicing self-care. I broke down last week and was bawling my eyes out and then started laughing because said, oh, I'm coming to do a panel for Jack.org on advocacy, and here I am, ready to quit my job and walk away from it all because I haven't been taking care of myself. And I think this is the biggest challenge that you will probably face, is really understanding what you need and that it's okay to take that. It's okay to take those days off and say, you know what, I actually can't do this today. I need to take care of myself and my mental health in order to keep persisting and to keep doing the incredible work that all of you are going to be doing and the work that we've been doing. And really being able to just slow down, take a breath, be patient with yourself, give yourself grace, and say, you know what, today's the day that I'm just not going to do it. And that is okay. And that's something that's so important, is really figuring out what are those things that may trigger you, or what are those things that you may take a moment and be really agitated or frustrated or angry about. I know it happens to me all the time. And in the line of work that I'm doing, when I am working on the front line, I make sure that the people I'm facilitating with know that there are certain topics that may come up that I may have to step out of the room for. And it's okay. And that's what they're doing as allies and as friends and as coworkers, is they are owning that space and saying, you know what, it's okay for you to take a moment and step out of the room and collect yourself. We're going to take this one on for you, and we're going to be here for you to help you. Yeah.
Can I just add on to that? We had talked about this backstage, and it was like how to be an ally. And I think that's really important, is if you see, you know, a friend, any marginalized friend in a space, even if it's online and they're defending themselves, like send them a message and be like, hey, you want to tap me in? Hey, can I step in? This is not safe for you to be in. How can I assist here? And even if it's being like, hey, like, you want to get coffee and just shoot the shit, or if it's tapping in on social media, or if it's, you know, DMing someone and saying, hey, like, you were attacking my friend and I really want to talk to you about it because this is not the space for them to be speaking. I mean, any way that you can, you know, we talk about like wanting to be the voice and speak. That's where you can be the voice and speak, is like protect your friends and put yourself on the front line of absorbing some of the attack that more marginalized people get on a daily, hourly, minutely basis.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely allyship is something we need to focus on. I know we talk about it a lot, but we're not always practicing it properly. This could be a question to any of you, but do you have any advice as to how we can focus more on practicing effective allyship?
Yeah, I would say step one, taking a second to listen when you realize the power and privilege that you do hold, whether that's like in this space, because it is relative power. It changes no matter which spot you're in. But once you realize what it is that you hold in that space, it's hard to unsee, but taking a step back and just listening, that's something that we do in our program a lot. The program is for boys who are 12 and 14, so giving space for one person to speak at a time is a challenge. It doesn't happen very often, but we work on that, and we say it's one person's chance to speak. Let's take us some time to listen. So hopefully we're changing a culture, but that's something that we need to do. I realize at times that I can be someone who interrupts often, and I'm like, oh man, again, practicing what you're preaching. I have to take my time to realize, okay, I need to just take a step back and listen. So just being mindful of the power that you're holding in that space.
Thank you.
I think, too, if I can add on to that, something for me that's been really important is having people recognize that everything is so messy, and being an ally is messy, social justice is messy, life is messy, and that's okay. But it's about owning up when you mess up and you saying, you know what, I need to pause this for a second. I just want to apologize for what I've done. Can we talk about how I can do this differently next time if I'm put in a situation like that? So it's this combination of listening and then owning up to what you've done, apologizing, moving forward, and not letting that keep you down.
Yeah, I definitely think we can relate to that. And I think Eric is probably one of the best allies in the room here. And I think he has learned from some of the mistakes that Jack.org may have faced early on. For example, we did start off with Eric doing most of the messaging before he realized we had to put the microphone in the hands of the youth. And it's lessons like that we've learned. We've used those mistakes as learning experience, and we've grown from that. So definitely some useful information there. I think we're going to throw it back to some of the student questions. I think I have some questions up there that are good for all of you. So we'll start with you, Talitha, again. Specifically, I guess, when it comes to your advocacy for Indigenous issues, what's the biggest challenge you've had to face specifically for advocating for Indigenous rights?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and this is more of like a personal answer, I guess, is I love meeting people and I love human interaction and I love hearing people's stories, but I take a lot of that on and I carry those stories with me, and those people that I meet, I know there's even a few folks in the room that I've met through programming before, and it's like I carry those stories with me, and I always will. That's something that's never going to change, but that can be a lot on myself and on my heart. And really taking that to kind of this space where I need to take care of myself, and I need to protect myself from other people's stories, and I need to protect myself. And it comes back to this message about self-care and why that's so important is I've spent the last 5 years not taking care of myself, and then have now the things that I love, I start having panic attacks before I start doing them. And so it's put me in this really vulnerable place where I need to stop and I need to say, you know what, I need to take a minute for myself, and I need to breathe, and I need to do grounding techniques in order for me to kind of move forward. So I think the biggest challenge has really been when you care so much, you need to stop yourself and you need to take care of yourself along that journey as well.
Moving on, this is actually an excellent question for you, Jermal. I assume this is probably something that does happen once in a while, but do you ever have experienced backlash, maybe because of the name of your organization, Next Gen Men, the fact that you are supporting men's mental health? And if you do experience that backlash, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, definitely. We've definitely got some backlash for that. Our name is Next Gen Men, and we often get mistaken for a men's rights activist group. Something we are very careful to not associate ourselves with, because that's not the work that we do. Mental health is an issue mental health is an intersection that does affect men on both sides. So if you're an MRA or if you're someone like ourselves who identifies like a pro-feminist organization, we understand that it affects men. So we look at it that way. How we deal with it, we state what we are, we defend what we are, because we believe in what we do. And we believe that we're at this place in time and doing work that we're doing because of the work of feminists before us. We're not afraid to say it, and that's why we identify with pro-feminist. So on the backlash of that, we'll get that we are women's sympathizers or empathizers, and that we're man-haters. And sure, if that's what you want to call us and throw names, then you can hurl names, but we're not going to engage with you in that. We'll call you in those conversations of what are the issues that you care about, and let's discuss those, because I'm sure that we have some commonalities among those. If it is high suicide rates among men, then yeah, let's discuss what we can do together to make that work. We won't work in collaboration, but I'm telling you that this is something that if you want to drop the name calling and all of that, we have the opportunity to do something great versus pushing down organizations and feminist organizations and movements that have done such a great job of uplifting voices that haven't been heard for so long. So we're very firm in our stance around that.
I think even with Jack.org, we face backlash sometimes too. I know we were on breakfast television a few days ago, and we faced some backlash ourselves after that. And what we did is we addressed that backlash, and we tried to educate the person on maybe a misconception. And sometimes we do get called out on things. Maybe it's something we have done wrong. And in that case, we do have to own up to it, and we have to grow and, I guess, change or adapt to address those issues.
Yeah, can I jump in? I think one of the things that we got called out for, specifically when it came to a stat, and that we had, I think, 8% on our website, and it was a stat of 7%. So someone was calling us out for not having the correct percentage. And I was, okay, I'll take that. That's a mistake. I'll own up to that. But I think we have bigger issues to talk about if that's what we're willing to nitpick at. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and I think we're going to try to wrap up with this one last question. It is blown up in front of us, so obviously I think someone's trying to tell me a message. So I've held a workshop about mental health leadership where every single attendee was a woman. Even the summit, where 76% of our attendees identify as women. So what do you think is stopping or preventing men from being a part of this conversation? So this is open to any of you.
Take that, yeah.
You want to go ahead so we can challenge you?
Yeah, respectfully, of course.
Kidding.
I think what's stopping men from coming to conferences like this, or just any event that we hold for space that are just for men, is appearing weak and being vulnerable. I think it's not something that we get given permission to be. We get told to toughen up, to man up, to suck it up in a variety of those fashions, and it gets reinforced in school. It gets reinforced in our sport culture if that's something that you do, and we realize that it doesn't make us. It doesn't allow us to get the things that we want. So we think that it's in the short term we're gaining, but we're actually losing. And I hope that's something that we are doing with this summit today and over the weekend, is that we're letting men know specifically that you will be gaining when you start to open up, that you start to shed these stigma around mental health. I think they're just saying that therapists need therapists, and it's no different for myself. I need someone to talk to when things are getting tough, and that's not a bad thing, and I'm not ashamed to say that either. So, yeah.
I was joking about challenging.
No,
because
no,
I
I
literally,
got- yeah.
I've been like this, every single thing that you're saying. No, I do. I believe it's men being viewed as weak. I think that we have a deeply ingrained homophobia in our society, and it's, if you are not, right now we live in a world that is hyperfeminism and hypermasculinity, and it's really difficult to exist in this kind of gray spectrum area where literally most people exist, but we've been told that there's a box here and there's a box there. So I think a lot of what's happening now around, feminism, maybe men don't feel safe in these spaces, or not safe, but invited into these spaces. And I'll be honest, there's some spaces that are for women, and there are things, we need to have safe-ish spaces for certain groups of people, and that means that other groups will be excluded from that, and that's okay. But I do think that men are so terrified, because we've made them so terrified of being seen as weak, of saying, I have mental health issues, and I need help, that every man has to be the breadwinner, the caretaker, the strong, tough, muscled man, and we have no spaces for softness at all, except the ones that, you're making, that are amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add, or?
I just think, huge shout out to everyone that's here that identifies as male, female, non-binary,
exactly.
Everyone that is in the audience. Just a huge shout out for you to even come out to these things and be a part of this. It's a huge first step, no matter how you identify, and I think that's really important to acknowledge as well.
Okay, I do think we need to wrap up. I know we could talk for hours about this. I'd love to ask you some more questions, but we have learned a lot about the challenges advocates face, and there are a lot of them, but we continue to fight, we continue to move forward and adapt. It's what we need to do in order to make our revolution a reality. So please join us in a round of applause for our panelists.